Connor, what's up, man?
What's going on? Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, it's good to have you, man. Dude, you got like this really cool, like robust, sort of like calming, like DJ voice. Has anyone ever told you that? You definitely have a voice for radio.
I have, there's a couple reviews on my podcast from people saying, I love your content, but I also just love your voice. And I feel
Yeah.
like you should do more meditations. And so maybe I'll shift to that at some point in the future. But yeah, I've heard that before.
It's a huge compliment. I've heard that as well. I remember when in the early days when I was me and Sean Stevenson we did the first 80 episodes of this podcast together. And I knew Sean before he was Big Sean, and we were really good friends. And he just like one thing I noticed about Sean right when we met the very first time we met because I became a client of his. Like I noticed, I was like, man, this guy's got like a really cool voice. I don't know what it is. It just calms me down. And then, so it was kind of funny, but early on in our podcast, like he was known as Audio Velvet and I was known as Audio Corduroy. So he was way more
That's funny.
velvety and sounded better, but yeah, I was corduroy.
It's funny. Like sometimes when I work with guys, one of the things that I'll have them do, because I think so. I have a degree in music, specifically in voice, and I trained as a singer
Really?
at one point in my life.
No way.
And yeah, and I like
That's
traveled
awesome.
and sang. I like traveled and sang in China and Czech Republic, Italy, Germany, France, all over America and Canada. And and so sometimes one of the things that I'll tell men is, your voice can oftentimes tell you a lot more, can oftentimes tell other people a lot about who you are. And so if you're somebody that speaks very quickly or you're speaking very high pitched, a lot of the times it's a it's a representation of the anxiety that you're carrying or the discomfort that's going on in your body. And so sometimes when I'm working with a man who has a lot of anxiety in his body, I'll say, okay, your practice, your actual exercise for the next week is to intentionally slow down your speech half speed. Like you're listening to a book on Audible, you can speed it up to 1.5 times, you can slow it down to half speed. And so I'll give them that exercise. And it's amazing how quickly that can change their internal state and people's external perceptions of them. And so a lot of guys that are married or have a girlfriend, they'll do that exercise for a week and they'll be like, man, I actually just felt a lot more calm, because we have to then bring attention and presence to how we're delivering our voice, our speech, which is in some ways a representation of how we're transmitting our internal state, right? Like when we speak and communicate. And so, yeah. So just a little helpful tidbit maybe for the guys or the gals that are out there that carry a little bit of anxiety and find themselves talking very quickly or high pitched sometimes.
It's interesting because my wife has a circle of friends, and some of them talk, like 3 out of 6 of them like talk insanely intense and very loud. And I always joke with my wife, I'm like, I literally like have to be like in the right headspace to hang out
Mm-hmm.
with them, because like sometimes having a conversation with them or around them is like being hit with a bolt of lightning. It's like, because they all, especially since there's like half of them that speak really, really high, really intense and really quickly. Well, then you've got over half of the crowd that's like trying to actually overpower each other. And it's like, oh God, it's like, calm down a little bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've noticed that in parenting, that when I'm calm, my kids are calm. I've noticed in marriage, when we're communicating, if I'm calm, she's calm. And, I've definitely noticed that here in the coaching space, that, if we can use our voice as an instrument to, project empathy, to project, hey, I see you, man. I understand everything that you're going through, to provide, this environment of comfort, right? And I wouldn't say comfort as in like, enabling, but comfort as in unpack what's going on here, so then we can go talk about how to go do something about it. Because until someone feels, comfortable and calm, and this is a safe environment for me to unpack things, we're not going to get to the true work. We're only going to get to
No.
the surface level work, which I know really well.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, one of the most important things that people underestimate when it comes to any type of therapeutic relationship or coaching relationship is actually the relationship that you have with that person.
100%.
Do you feel comfortable with them? Are you okay with them challenging you? Do you get along with them? Like that rapport. And there's been studies that have been done on this, that prove time and time again that the rapport that you have with your therapist will oftentimes dictate the quality of the outcomes that you get in that therapeutic environment. And so it is incredibly important. And I think the other thing that I'll just touch on, and I'm sure that we'll come back to this throughout the podcast at some point, but is I believe that our mission as men in relationships is to outground our partners, to be more regulated more consistently than our partners. And I believe that as men, part of the value that we can offer anyone, anywhere, but specifically our family systems, is to be the sort of calm in the storm. And so when we can learn how to work with our bodies and our nervous system, and we can learn how to ground ourselves, not in a fake way, not in like a pretend way where, afterwards we got to go have a drink or, smoke a joint in order to like deal with the stress that we're now carrying, but in a very real way where we learn how to ground ourselves. That brings something to the relationship, and it allows our wives, our partners, to open up, to be a little bit more vulnerable, to soften. It allows our kids, I have a 2.5-year-old, and so I do this all the time with him, and I don't get it right 100% of the time. Like I'm not, I don't
Wait,
do
you're
it
not
right all
perfect?
the time. I'm not perfect by
Connor,
any means.
why are you on this show? I only
Right.
interview perfect parents and perfect people. So
That'd be a good show, right? Just a podcast called The Perfect People Podcast, right?
yeah, right.
And then it's just like stories of shit shows.
Right. Wow, we got 4 subscribers this week. Awesome.
Yeah. But I'll do this with my son where he'll be throwing
Yeah.
a temper tantrum or whatever, and I'll pick him up and I'll say inhale through your nose, and I'll point to my nose, and I'll say exhale through your mouth, and he'll throw his temper tantrum still for a bit, and then eventually he'll either like go on his own way and calm down, or he'll engage with me and the activity. And so we can be the co-regulation that our families need, right? And oftentimes we get into this space of like, why won't my wife change? And why is she so aggressive? And how come she's always criticizing me? And
Never
we
hear
try
that.
and have other people change versus us staying in a space of learning how to ground ourselves and be a sort of lightning rod for the energy in the family to pass through. And so anyway,
What a really cool analogy. I love that metaphor of the lightning rod. What's really fascinating is that we call that become the lowest heartbeat in the room. That's the terminology that we use to be more grounded. But the interesting thing is that, and you know this as well as I do, and this might sound self-serving on both of our ends, but you can't do that consistently on your own without having some sort of outlet, right? Because it's almost like carrying a rucksack. When you're grounded for other people, that does take a tremendous amount of energy, right? And it creates a tremendous amount of energy over time.
Yeah.
And over time, that energy does build up on us. And you mentioned the thing like where we might cope, right? Whether it's go have a drink, go smoke weed or whatever it is, go look at porn, like whatever it is that we have to go do to regulate, to decompress, which in actuality, what you really need, what I think, and what the biggest missing piece is men need community. Actually, human beings need community. Like I don't care if you're a man or a woman, for your mental and emotional well-being and to be the best person, you need a team. I ran this comparison across one of my groups here this past week. I'm like, hey, who's the best quarterback of all times? One guy said, well, my son, but Tom Brady's number 2. So, but you look at somebody like Tom Brady, and the question I asked these guys, I was like, does Tom Brady win Super Bowls all by himself? And they're like, well, no, of course not. Of course not. He's got the receivers. He's got the running backs. He's got the offensive line. He's got the coaches. Like it's all these people that are around him as a team that makes the team that he plays for successful. right? Now, granted, he's got skills and all that, but he can't do it by himself. If he gets snapped the ball, he is not going to go for a touchdown every single time. He'll probably get decimated, right? So there's something to be said for that. I do want to jump right into one of the things that you and I talked about, which something that you're very keen on these days, and that's the epidemic of male vacancy. And I agree with this, but I want you to explain to the audience what you mean by that.
Yeah, well, it sounds very, science-y, which is catchy in our modern times, right? We're very data-driven in today's world, but the essence of it is that we are living through a time, culturally, socially, where men where men are vacant from a lot of the places that we've normally inhabited, and where young boys are growing up with a vacancy of male role models. And so, for example, and I'm just going to hit you with a few data points, and then we'll unpack it. But
Awesome.
for example, 1 in 4 households, 1 in 4 kids will grow up without a father in the household, right? 1 in 4, so 25% of kids will grow up without a father present. Right now, there are 2 women graduating for every 1 man in college. So there are less men going to college than ever before. It's actually flipped from the 1960s, before we passed Title IX so that more women could go to college and universities. At that time, it was 2 men for every 1 woman. And now it's actually flipped, and it's actually getting worse. And so there are less men going to universities than ever before. We have 7 million men of working age that are 24 to 55 that are eligible to work, that are not working, that are on, social programs and usually very medicated. In fact, there's some places in America where it's gotten so bad that, you can see in certain parts of the states where it's like 45% of men in a state are working, or 45% of men in a county are working. And the rest of them are on welfare and social programs. And those men on average are, spending 2,000 hours a year on a screen. So those are some of the things. And then when you look at, well, like, why is this happening? How is this happening? One of the big pieces that you start to see, that I've started to see, is that a young boy will and can go through the majority of his upbringing with almost no male role models whatsoever present in his life. So if you're a young boy and you don't, by the way, and this isn't to knock single moms, this isn't to knock single parent households. I just have to sort of preface that, because I think usually sometimes it gets received as an attack, and it's just not. A young boy that grows up in a household without a father present can then go into a school system where a very small percentage of his teachers are going to be men. So on average in America, roughly 74% of school teachers are women. And in the lower grades, it's much worse. So like in kindergarten, for example, and grade 1, it's something like 2% of teachers are male. So
yeah, you never hear about them.
Yeah, you just never hear about it, right? And it's getting so bad that a lot of schools are having problems finding coaches for after school programs, and so they're not able to run after school programs for young boys. And so, and even a lot of the spaces like Boy Scouts that have traditionally been, boys only, they're not boys only anymore. There's girls that are a part of them. And so you can be a young boy who goes through an education institution, goes through kindergarten to grade 12 with very few male teachers, male role models. And if you don't have a man in the house, where are you learning what it looks like to be a man? Because the reality is that a lot of how we become men is through modeling, right? We watch, we observe, we see how our fathers deal with their anger. We see how our fathers treat our mothers. We see how men out, that are educators, they inspire us to learn. They inspire us to push boundaries and take risks and these types of things. We have coaches. And so when you don't have those types of things, my fundamental belief is that you then become malnourished in the nutrient of masculinity. And you stop understanding and being able to perceive what it looks like to be a man. And what fills its place because, nature abhors a vacuum, as they say in physics. What fills its place is that you then look to women, to girls, to validate whether or not you are a good man. And I think that we're living through one of the first times, maybe in human history, but certainly in the last, few hundred or few thousand years, where men don't define anymore, largely in a social way, what it means to be a good man and what it means to be a masculine man. That has largely been taken up by women in the social narrative. And so when you look out at the culture of Western society, largely what it means to be a good man and to be a man who's using his masculinity acceptably, that is largely being dictated by women now. And I'm not necessarily saying that that's good or bad. I'm not trying to make a moral statement on it. I'm more saying, here's what I see happening. And we can debate and talk about whether that's
It's
good
really
or bad.
interesting that you say that, because I can definitely see that with previous generations, even my generation, because especially with being around other men. I remember early on, in my personal development journey, when I first started just listening to podcasts, and it just was like, I just want to listen to podcasts because I want information on how to do these things better. But the interesting thing about a podcast, and even though quite frankly, the ironic thing is we're talking about this on a podcast, so other men are going to be hearing our voices and our conversation and consuming content, probably just like you and I did, right? And that's how we started this whole process, is I want to consume content on my own to really start to unpack and understand what it means to be a better man. However, I think that when you do that, and Connor, the story I'm telling myself is you probably get very similar emails like I do, meaning there isn't a week that goes by. And this week it's only Tuesday and I've already gotten 3 of them, 2 yesterday, 1 this morning. And the themes are always the same. Larry, I need help. I don't know what to do. My marriage is crumbling. It's over. She told me it's over. She told me she wants out. She told me she doesn't love me anymore. And then I'll get, like, the one I got this morning was like 5 paragraphs long. Like, this guy just poured his heart out, and I'm sitting there thinking, and I always ask the same questions. I'm like, dude, what have you been doing to learn new things to be a better, whatever it is that they've identified, right? A lot of it has to do with a communication breakdown, or he doesn't really know how to love her in the way. He doesn't even know how to communicate his own needs to her. But a lot of it usually boils down to connection, communication, safety, right? And also this thing, which I think it's ridiculous. I just interviewed Gary Chapman yesterday, which is we're dealing with a generation as well. And I think we've been dealing with this generation since the 80s, maybe even the late 70s, which is the covenant of marriage is now gone. In other words, like, my grandma and grandpa were married for 53 years, and they had their peaks and valleys, but they were in it. Like, there was no giving up, no matter what. Like, that was their attitude. And then it seemed like our parents' generation was probably the first generation of like, just not feeling it anymore, just not in love with you anymore. And then it became more like this emotional sort of decision to detach and end the marriage. But I think we can really get in front of that as men. We can get really in front of that as a couple, to be quite honest. We're not just talking to men, we're talking to women too, but we can really get in front of that as a couple if we decide to do work. And I honestly think, even though we have a podcast and you have books, I have books, but that's a one-way street of information. And then when you go to then implement some of those things that you read about, it's going to feel usually really clunky. It's kind of like a surgeon that goes in and does surgery, and all he has done is study surgery through a book. And now he's like, oh my gosh, I got to put my hands on this patient. And to add to that, men try to go at that. And if we take the surgeon's perspective, right, he's doing it all by himself. He doesn't have a whole team around him with that patient. He's trying to literally do everything himself, which is extremely overwhelming. But you put yourself into a room, right, with other like-minded men who share vision, who share the same goals. And going back to your very point of like, hey guys, this is how we measure what a good man is and the things a good man does. And not only the things a good man does, but the things that he could do very, very well in an environment where we can conversate and talk about and strategize how to create, an incredible connection with our wife. But I think you're right. Most men are not having that conversation. You know, I think they're more in the shadows of taking in content, which I think is better than doing nothing, but I still don't think it's enough. But I think that there's not only a vacancy in families, but there's a tremendous vacancy of men doing life with other men. And for some reason, I can't quite put my finger on that one. I mean, that used to be my world, so I remember justifying it. I'd be really interested to hear what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I think that there's a tremendous amount of, I don't know who coined the term, but somebody somewhere smarter than me from a marketing perspective said that there's a lot of copium in our society.
What's that?
Copium.
Yeah, what is that?
It's like opium, but with a C, right? Like coping mechanisms.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I was like, is that a new drug out?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But there's all of these things that, you know, make it easy for you as a man to check out from society, to check out from your relationship, from your purpose, from your mission, from your body, you know, video games, porn, weed, you know, all of these things have become so accessible. I mean, I think that pornography is one of the biggest sort of unintentional or maybe intentional, one of the biggest unintentional or intentional experiments that we have put on men. You know, I mean, think about being somebody that likes alcohol and having a liquor cabinet literally follow you around everywhere, whether you go in the bathroom at work to take a shit, or you know, you're downstairs in your gym. You can open up the liquor cabinet at any time. That's what porn is, right? At any time you can open your phone and you can go on to Pornhub or whatever your website is, and you can go look up a porn. And you don't even need to do those things. You can just go onto a social media platform and they will dish out to you chicks in bikinis with big asses and motivational quotes, right? Like you don't even have to go and try and search out, you know, porn directly. Social media will be happy to feed it to you. And so, you know, I think that we have more distractions than ever before.
Yeah,
and
we do.
You know, the data shows this, right? I mean, 15% of men in America do not have one close friend. 15% of men, and it's the highest that it's ever been. The UK has actually instituted a minister of loneliness. I think it was in 2018 or 2019, because loneliness and isolation was getting so bad. And this is pre-pandemic, right? So, and then you know, men back in the 60s and 70s, I think it was like 65% of men back in the 60s and 70s had 6 or more close friends. And today it's something like 30%, right? That have 6 or more close friends that they can point to and say, yeah, I'm really close with that guy. And so I think that it's a number of things that are converging. I think, you know, the quote unquote value of masculinity in our modern culture has been sort of devalued. I think a lot of men feel that. And, you know, there's the structures, the social structures that we've normally had that have been in place to help men connect, where men can go and do stuff that dudes like doing, you know, like being out in nature and learning survival skills and being able to shoot the shit and talk about whatever it is, right? Just being able to talk about the hard things in your life, to know that you're not going through those things alone. And so I have my own takes on some of the reasons that, you know, some of the reasons why those things have started to break down. I think we've underestimated, for example, the generational trauma of World War II, that a lot of these men came back with heavy amounts of trauma and PTSD and ways of being that put them into survival mode, right? Millions of men coming back to their families, just expected to like pick up and you know, go back to being a dad and go back to being a husband, and, you know, go back to the farm. And, you know, meanwhile, what's playing through their heads are, you know, the deaths of their friends and brothers that they were at war with, and the slogans of man up and suck it up and all these types of things that they had to do in order to survive, which is in some ways very noble, in other ways it's heartbreaking. And so I think that those men came back and fathered a whole generation of men that were that were basically parented by people with really heavy PTSD and trauma. And you just can't escape that, and I think like my grandfather fought in World War II, and some of the stories that I heard him tell were brutal. They were really terrible. And my father grew up with him, and some of the stories that I heard from my dad about what it was like to be around him was hard because he definitely had PTSD, but there wasn't really an awareness socially of that at the time. And so, I think there's a number of things that play into men not trusting men and men not seeing the value in having really robust male friendships. And I think we're starting to come out of that now. I think that the social narrative is starting to change. I think there's a lot of awareness around men's health now, and there's, men are having different conversations, and they're starting to realize that they don't have to wait to bottom out in order to start creating change in their life. They just have to be willing to go through some type of very hard confrontation. And there's a reason, the last thing I'll say is there's a reason why there's the cliche saying of iron sharpens iron. What it really means is masculinity sharpens masculinity. And so unless you're willing to get around other men who are going to challenge you and love you and push you and, be in your corner and fight with you shoulder to shoulder, it's going to be very hard for you to sharpen yourself as a man, as a father, as a husband, as a leader. And that's kind of the prerequisite, right? That's what it takes, is being around other men that you respect and that you admire and who are going to push you. So, yeah.
You said so much there, and I think that there's common themes there that men are now, I think, stepping up to the plate and having more of these conversations, which is a really, really good sign. The interesting thing you said about even our grandparents, the ones that fought in World War II. I have a very close friend of mine that her grandfather was in World War II and never recovered mentally. It just went into the war. One person came back completely different. Stayed married to her grandma for another 30 years or whatever it was, 40 years. But their relationship was never the same. And I see the impact of that big time. And that was tremendously traumatic. And I think you're right. We're probably seeing some of the things that have emerged because of that. At the same time, it is good to know that men are having these conversations. Like I said, the one thing that I truly wish for most men is that when it comes to these conversations or when it comes to these circles of like-minded individuals, it's a lot like preventative care of things that you could get in front of very quickly and, quite frankly, not pay a high price for them, whether that be emotionally, physically, financially, meaning like when your marriage is crumbling and you've got 2 or 3 kids and it goes to divorce, that is a major cost impact financially, emotionally, mentally, physically, intimately. It's a traumatic experience to go through that. Well, so is, not getting the oil changed in your car because your engine is over time just going to completely wear out and you need a whole new engine or a whole new car. Same thing with your teeth. Everybody, most people I know go to the dentist at least once a year, if not every 6 months. If you're not doing that, teeth are going to fall out, right? But you don't go to the dentist after you've lost 9 teeth and you're like, I think I should do something about this. You go to the dentist when your teeth start to hurt, right? But you want to get in front of that and be extremely proactive. But for the life of me, a lot of us are not doing that in our relationships. We're not doing that in our marriages. We're not doing that with parenting. We're just sort of like, well, everybody else is winging it, so why shouldn't I? Which I think is, quite frankly, the wrong approach. You mentioned porn in there, which we've been talking about this topic a lot over the past 3 months, and it's created a lot of interesting responses on social media and things that I've gotten online. But I'll admit, like, porn was my vice, right? Not a big drinker, drugs not my thing. I eat right, I work out, but porn was the thing that I went to years ago. And I never saw the harm in it, like really ever. In fact, In fact, the way that I justified it, and I think a lot of guys justify it this way, is like, it's a great way to relieve stress. It's not hurting anybody. It's not like I'm beating anybody. It's not like I'm getting drunk or whatever. It's not like I'm, out being a criminal. And I also looked at it since I was like, at the time, the higher driver in my relationship with my wife. And I thought to myself, well, I don't want to bug her with my needs. So if I can do things in between that I don't have to bother her with that, then that's probably a good thing. Like all these ways that I justified it. And there's a lot of things that once I got away from it, I didn't see it. But once I got away from it, I was like, oh my gosh, this is really crazy. So like, for instance, how I viewed, and this was never anything that I meant for, right? How I viewed my wife became so much more intimate than what it was when I was watching porn. Like the way I viewed her was like, it was very different, almost in this really beautiful, emotional, physical, intimate way that I didn't view her before. The other thing too is I became insanely more productive. Like, because I mean, even if it's only minutes, right? It's still a distraction that takes you away from something else that's really important. And I think one of the statistics I read, if you lose focus for even a few minutes, it could cost you a couple hours. So people don't see it that way. Yeah. And the other thing too is that I really think from a brain function perspective, there's a lot of things that happen to the brain over time. Like, what's really interesting, and then I want to hear all your thoughts on this. I had somebody else come on the podcast and talk about porn-induced erectile dysfunction and all the stats about that. He's like, hey man, he goes, you want me to point out something that you probably have seen, but now every time you see it, you won't be able to unsee it. And I'm like, okay, what is it? He goes, have you noticed all of the ED commercials? Like whether it's for a prescription or whether it's for Hims or whatever else, have you noticed anything about it? And I'm like, I don't think so. Like, what is it? He goes, every single guy in that is in between probably 30 and 45. He goes, and if you really think about when Cialis, Viagra hit the market, it was always older men, always like in their 60s. And now it's the millennials. And I'm like, oh my God, you're right. He's like, we're seeing this huge tidal wave of porn-induced ED and men in their 20s struggling with erectile dysfunction. So it's really fascinating.
Yeah, testosterone rates are down in men by something like 40%. Sperm counts are plummeting. And there's a hormone expert that I just interviewed, and the podcast hasn't come out yet, but he said what's good for men's sperm is good for men. And so if your sperm is struggling, it's a sign, it's an indicator. It's like the canary in the coal mine that something's going on with your health, because that's like your core reproductive function, right? But yeah, I mean, porn, I think the first thing that I would say, like I wrote about porn in my book, and the thing that I said is I'm not interested in the moral debate. If you think that porn is morally fine, cool. If you think that porn is morally reprehensible and unjustifiable, all good. What I'm more interested in is what are the effects of it? Why do we use it? And how do you quit it if you don't want to watch it anymore? Which most guys, not all guys, but the majority of men who watch porn on a regular basis and then want to quit will tell you how hard it is. Like it took me probably a year and a half to actually stop watching porn. It took me a long time. It was brutal. It was challenging. I would like bargain with myself, like try and cut deals with myself. Like it was a really hard thing to quit because I used it a lot, and I had used it, since I was like 13 years old, back with like dial-up internet, watching a photo load line by line, right? And so porn does a couple of things that I think are important to know. Number one, the majority of men are using it as a nervous system regulation tool. Okay, what do I mean by that? What I mean is that anytime you are feeling something as a man that you don't like, it's very likely that you've conditioned yourself, or your body has been conditioned to use porn as a modulator to help you stop feeling that way. So if you are feeling anxious and you don't want to feel anxious, your brain's going to go, oh shit, I don't like feeling this way. What can I do? Well, porn will help me, right? Because I'll get off, and then brain will release all the neurotransmitters and all the neurochemicals like dopamine and prolactin and oxytocin to help me feel better and to help me relax and to help me feel less anxious. And so for a lot of guys, when they start to tune into why am I actually using porn, and I usually ask them in a very specific question, if you're wanting to quit porn, or even if you're not wanting to quit porn, ask yourself every time you want to watch it, what am I actually feeling? What am I actually experiencing right now? And for a lot of men, what they start to notice is that 7 or 8 times out of 10, they are feeling something they don't like. They're feeling bored or lonely or angry or frustrated or anxious, or they're disconnected or they feel isolated or whatever it is, but they're feeling something that they don't like. And porn is the escape from that internal experience. And so porn becomes this sort of not just a coping mechanism, but what ends up happening is that because of the neurochemicals that our brain releases when we watch porn and after we ejaculate, it actually can create a very real dependency where in order to regulate our system, in order to modulate our mood, we will almost feel like we need porn in order to just feel like we're in a good place. And so for some men, it can get as bad as, they need to watch it in the morning. When they wake up, they need to watch it at night before they go to bed. It can become this very pervasive thing in their life. And so that's the one piece that's really big. The other piece that I haven't heard anybody else talk about, and I talked about this extensively because porn was such a big challenge in my life, and I did a ton of research on it, and I interviewed Stanford professors on it and sort of dug deep into the weeds. I ended up building a porn detox program to help guys quit porn. And so one of the things that I talked about in the program that I haven't heard anybody else talk about is that porn creates a pseudo-attachment. And we all operate based off of attachment, right? Like you said before, we're social creatures. And so we want to be in relationship. And what can happen is that over time, many guys build a type of pseudo attachment or a pseudo relationship with pornography. And so again, if you're out there listening to this, you can tune into, when are you watching porn? Is it when you and your girlfriend or your wife are disconnected, when she's gone, when you're feeling lonely, when you're in a fight, right? When you're aroused, but she doesn't want to have sex, and then all of a sudden you turn to porn. And so for a lot of guys, what ends up happening is that they get something that they're looking for in a relationship from pornography. They get some part of the intimacy or the connection that they're looking for from their wife or their girlfriend in pornography. And this is why when you look at something like OnlyFans, which, by the way, I think it was 2021, did $5.4 billion, right? Just an inhumanely amount of money. Like, it's just stupid how much money they made. When you look at some of the top performers, they are oftentimes the like girl next door. Some of them are very attractive, but for the most part, it's like these sort of girl next door women that are providing this like girlfriend type experience. And so what does that tell you? What does that tell me? It tells me that a lot of men are looking for some type of intimacy and connection in these relationships. And when, I've worked with hundreds and thousands of guys around pornography, and one of the things that I've found time and time again is that when a man is using those types of things, whether it's cam girls or just, videos and porn and pictures, or OnlyFans, there's some type of connection that ends up getting built, and they keep going back for a similar thing or a similar fantasy or a similar experience. And so porn ends up being this attachment and this pseudo relationship that fills in the gaps for what we think or feel is missing from our relationship. And so I'll give another example. If you're a guy that has been married for a couple of years and you've wanted to engage in some type of sexual fantasy with your partner, or you've wanted to experience something in your relationship, right? Maybe you want to feel more powerful or dominant in your marriage or your relationship, and you are very confronted by the idea of bringing that into the bedroom or talking to your wife or your girlfriend about it, it's so much easier to just go online and watch the porn that tricks your brain into thinking that you are doing that, right? So you go online, you go and watch some, whatever it is, right? BDSM porn or whatever. And you get this pseudo sensation, this like pseudo experience that your needs are being met. All the while, you know that it's not true. So what that does is it pulls a part of us away from our relationship. It pulls a part of us out of our marriage, out of our relationship. And it creates this split where for a lot of men, they feel like the totality of who they are, especially sexually, can't fit into their relationship, right? It's like if you want something sexually in your marriage or your relationship, and you've bought into this story that that your partner doesn't want that, or that it's never going to happen, or that's too confronting, then it's so much easier to build a kind of relationship with porn and go get those needs met. So I think the other big piece, just to cap that off, is attachment. It creates these pseudo attachments, and with AI, that's only going to get worse, right? Like we're right in the area of having. Did you see that movie Her with Joaquin Phoenix? Did you see that one?
I haven't seen that yet. No.
You should definitely go check it out. I strongly recommend it because that's going to exist in a year or two. Basically, in the movie, Joaquin Phoenix has this earpiece, and there's an AI model that is basically it turns into his girlfriend, and he basically like walks through life living with her in his ear, talking to this AI model, being sexual with this AI model, the whole thing. And we're there, right? Like I've seen ads on Reddit now where guys can go and create their own AI chatbot, and you can tailor her to look the way you want visually, and you can tailor her to talk to you in the way that you want, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like you can actually modify the model to engage with you in the way that you want. And so we're right on the precipice of being able to have AI chatbots that if you want to go have some, BDSM style relationship, or you want to be cucked, or you want to whatever, you can have an AI model that will do that for you. And so we're about to enter into this territory where you won't even be interacting. There's going to be a whole bunch of OnlyFans accounts that are AI. There's going to be a whole bunch of porn that is entirely AI generated. And so you'll go on OnlyFans and you'll see this beautiful woman, you'll see her videos, and it'll all be AI generated. And then you'll chat with her, and that'll be an AI chatbot as well. And so we're creating this technology, which is a bit scary because for a lot of guys, they're going to fall deeper down the rabbit hole. And what I've seen some men say on YouTube, on some of the comments in my videos, because I've been talking about this quite a bit, is there's almost this sort of, like fuck it mentality. And on the other side, there's this practical side, right? It's like porn is a low risk, high reward experience. You're not going to get rejected. You're not going to be told no. You can go look at and find whatever you want. And soon you're going to have the tools to basically build whatever type of sexual experience that you want to have. And so there's a very low risk in that. And so for a lot of guys, it's like, well, that's just practical. I can just get what I want. I don't have to work for it. But the downfall is that you're never in relationship with a woman. And so you miss out on a lot of the sensory data that our bodies actually need in order to feel fulfilled. Because again, relationships are a core foundational piece of being human. You can't negate it out of you. You can't push it out of you. So I know that was a lot on pornography, but I have a few things to say about it. So
That's crazy, man. I had no idea about the AI stuff, but it's interesting that we'll justify those things, or the story that we tell ourselves, right? That like if we have a fantasy of some sort, like my partner, she won't partake in this, right? Or she'll reject me or whatever else. What's really interesting is I used to, years ago, I used to think that way too. But then I just started communicating. right? And without the agenda that she was going to say yes or no, but it was my job to at least communicate, what it is that I wanted. Like, I think that that's part of the human experience in an intimate relationship where there's authenticity and vulnerability, right? Where if I can't share my deepest or wildest fantasies with the woman that I'm married to, well, who can I? Right? I mean, I really can't. Then I'm like going and trying to build an AI bot, right? But I think you can, it's really interesting though, kind of a quick story. This was years ago. And I had wanted to do something like in the bedroom for like 10 years. And I don't want people's imagination to go wild. It was really tame, like super tame, like nothing. I'm one of those people. I don't like really anything like crazy out of the ordinary. Like I really don't. But it was one thing that my wife and I hadn't tried. And I really wanted to. And I was like, I remember being like just really nervous to ask her, be like, is she going to be, will she be on board with this? Or she's, whatever else. And I didn't even really think that she was going to think it was weird because, like I said, it wasn't anything outside the box, but we just hadn't done it yet. But I noticed that there was tremendous hesitation in me to ask. And it wasn't until I really stepped back of like, well, what's the hesitation? And quite honestly, it was fear of rejection is really what it boiled down to. Well, what if she says no? What does that say about me? What does that say about us? What does that say about our relationship? And it was a stupid story that like, if she said no, then, she's saying no to me, then I'm rejected, that I'm this, that I'm that I'm not attractive enough. I'm not enough for, it's like all this crazy crap that I was putting on top of what her response was going to be. And in actuality, it was just that yes or no to the thing. So I'll never forget asking my wife. One day I just asked her, I was like, hey, I have a question for you. I have a request. And she's like, okay, what is it? And I was like, it's taken me like 10 years to ask you this. And she's like, and she kind of looked at me like, oh my gosh, like, what is it? And I just asked her and she's like, yeah, of course we can do that. That sounds fun. When do you want to? And I was like, are you serious? And she's like, yeah, it sounds great. Let's try it. And I was like, and my wife looked at me shaking her head. She goes, you've been holding on to that for 10 years? Like that's nothing. Like, right. And I'm sitting there thinking like, yeah, I have. She's like, why? I was like, I don't know. And then I just kind of started telling her, she's like, if you can't tell me, who can you tell? And I was like, God bless, man. There's so much truth in that. Like it was just this ridiculous story that I was telling myself that quite frankly was not true. And here's the other thing too. It wasn't even based on experience and facts of things like that happening in our relationship in the past. In fact, it was quite the opposite. Usually anything I asked for, like it was okay. It was fine. But in this particular situation, I didn't think it would be. But it was, it all boiled down to the stupid story I was telling myself.
Well, I mean, it makes sense, right? Like sex is the place where usually the deepest parts of our shame and our insecurities come to bear.
Right.
That's where they show up. And usually what I'll tell guys is focus less on what you want things to look like, because we can get very fixated on, I want to do it in this position or like this fantasy. And those things are important to talk about for sure. Like sometimes those things are very important to talk about. But what I'll usually say is pull back and focus in on how do you want to feel, while you're having sex with your partner, while you're being intimate with them. Do you want to feel powerful? Do you want to feel desired? Do you want to feel worship? Do you want to feel like, how do you actually want to feel? And tune into that, because then the rest of the dance, or the poses, if you will, or the positions, those things emerge out of that. And if you can tune really into how do I want to feel during sex with my partner and start to bring that into the bedroom, and maybe that's a conversation with them, right? Like, hey, I want to feel more, whatever it is, right? I want to feel more potent, or I want to feel submissive, or I want to feel whatever, taken care of, or etc. Right? Fill in the blank. I want to feel love. And then bring
I want my neighbors to hear you scream.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. But that's more logistics. And what we usually do as men is we lead with logistics. And, if you're with a partner who's a little bit more sexually shy, or if you're worried about, your partner really being confronted by the things that you want to do, lead with how you want to feel first. and then let the logistics follow after, because it'll give her, like, women are very emotions based. And so if you say, hey, I want to fuck you in this position, she might say yes, but she might not, she also might say no because she doesn't know why you want that. And so if you lead with, hey, this is what I want to feel in the bedroom, and because of that, here's what I want to explore, right? Here's the fantasy or the whatever it is, the power dynamic that I want to experience with you. And women are much more receptive to that because it speaks their language first and then yours second.
That makes total sense, because I've noticed even in my own relationship when I go and have a request, right? I think the first filter my wife and probably most women run things through is, well, is something wrong now?
Right.
Is something not working now? Are we broken? But I think you're right. If you lead with that feeling first, they probably would get quite on board with that.
Yeah. And I think
Yeah.
one of the biggest mistakes that I've seen us as men make, and this is just from, I've been working with dudes for over a decade, and my wife is one of the best couples therapists. And so we work with couples all the time. And one of the biggest mistakes, and I've done this in the past, so I'm not taking myself out of this arena, but one of the biggest things that we do is that we try and complain or criticize our way into better sex. And we'll say things like, how come you don't want to have sex more? Or like, why didn't you want to have sex last night? Or like, how come, you only want to have sex twice a week instead of 3 times like I want to? And we'll get in this habit of trying to criticize our partner or complain to our partner to get what we want. And I promise you, it will never work. It is the strategy that is, it actually has the reverse effect.
Reverse.
It actually has the reverse effect, where the more you complain and criticize, the less likely your partner is to want to have sex with you, period, full stop. And so we have to adopt a different way. And, a lot of times that complaining and criticizing is coming from insecurity, it's coming from fear, it's coming from, feeling disconnected, and us just not being super tuned into, like, what am I actually experiencing? And so lead with that, right? Lead with the, hey, I'd really like to experience X, Y, and Z. Because then your partner, your wife, your girlfriend is going to be like, oh, well, there must be something wrong, right? It's like, no, this is just what I want to experience. I'm just telling you, I'm just expressing my needs, my wants, my desires. And that is much more attractive, right? Women can trust that more. Women want to be, generally speaking, with men who know what they're experiencing internally and are able to communicate it. Plain and simple. It's much more easy for a woman to trust a man who's dialed in, and it's much harder for a woman to feel safe with a man who is hiding or disconnected from what he's experiencing, right? This is why women hate when they identify that we're pissed off and they're like, why are you so angry? And we're like, I'm not angry, right? And we just deny it, and then, no, I'm not angry. And she knows, right? She knows that internally that you're pissed off about something, or you're upset. And that breaks the trust. It breaks her sense of safety with you, because she then can't trust that you can admit or at least know what's going on inside of you. So anyway, that was a side tangent, but there it is.
I 100% agree. I'm going to say this one quick comment, but I need to wrap up with you here in about 7 minutes, because I actually have to host a coaching call in our mastermind myself. But
nice.
So I want you to, while I say this last statement, I would love for you to just be ready to share with us just some key takeaways, and then where guys can find you. But I can definitely tell you, like, listen, guys, if you can learn anything from, guys who have made mistakes before you, right? And if there's a story that I could tell myself early on in my marriage, is if, sexual needs, quote unquote needs, are not being met, the last thing you want to do is complain and then pout about it. So like I remember when I would, be in the mood, I'm talking like when early on in my marriage, for some crazy reason, like I actually expect us to have sex every day, especially like in the first year. Like I was like, it's the honeymoon phase. We got to be doing it like every day, or at least every other day. And when that wasn't happening, like I'd kind of get pissed, like, cause it wasn't meeting my expectations, right? That's really what it boiled down to. Didn't meet my expectations, which then when I got to know, I didn't feel like, well, maybe I'm old news already, or maybe it had everything to do with my own insecurities and nothing to do with her. right? And I know that now. But my reaction to it was terrible. But I see this very commonly where my reaction to it early on in my marriage was like, if we didn't have sex and I wanted to, and she said, hey, no, not tonight, I don't really want to, I took that almost as a personal, like, I don't want you. My wife used to tell me this all the time, and I never got it. I never understood it because I couldn't separate the two. She'd be like, Larry, I'm not saying no to you. I love you. I'm attracted to you. Of course I want to have sex with you. I'm just saying no tonight. Like, I just don't want to tonight. Like, I'm exhausted, or like I have to get up at 4 a.m. or like whatever. Right. But I took it as a personal thing. And even now, like, we've been married for 20 years and we've had this understanding now for years, like for years. And there's still like those old tapes, right? Where my wife is like, if I ask, or if I, make a move, right? Or whatever in advance that I want to. And if she says, I'm just actually not in the mood, which quite frankly is extremely rare for my wife to say I'm not in the mood. Like, that probably happens 1 out of every 30 to 50 times now. And I think a lot of that has to do with everything that we just talked about, how we communicate about it. Like, there's no complaining, there's no pouting, there's no, like, I stand within what I would call my masculine power, and I don't put that on her. So when she says things like, hey, I really wish I could tonight, I was in the mood earlier today, but I'm not now. Like, I'm just really exhausted. I'm like, yeah, cool, no problem. And she's like, you're not upset? I'm like, and this has been years. I'm like, Jess, I was like, no, I'm not upset. I haven't been upset for years. Like, I totally get it. Like, I totally get it. Like, we have each other for our whole lives. We have sex often. I'm not worried if you don't want to have sex one time. She's like, I know, but you used to like, I was like, that was a long time ago. I don't get upset anymore because I realize it has nothing to do with me. And I can see, like, even now when I remind her of that, it's like you can just see her relax, right? And then usually it's within 24 hours, like, boom, like it's happening. But the interesting thing is if I were to pout or complain, guaranteed it would be far and few between, like the next time we're trying to do it. Right. But I want to kick this back to you as far as like main takeaways, where men can find you, and just your overall 30,000 foot thoughts on everything we've discussed.
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple takeaways is, one, maybe from an action standpoint, just connecting with the men in your life, like really making an effort to be the one who's in the driver's seat of the relationships of your life. I think what I've noticed, especially in myself, is that when life starts to get hard or challenging, that's when I check out. That's when I actually like unplug from the relationships in my life. I stop texting, I don't call, I don't interact, and I've just been notorious for that for a very long time. And I think a lot of men resonate with that. And so I've really had to work diligently and hard to stay plugged into the relationships. And for me, I've just used the analogy because I love driving. I used to race motorcycles. And so I like the notion of being in the driver's seat of my relationships and not waiting for other men to text or call, not waiting to, plan a date with my wife, not waiting on any of those things, and actually deciding how I want to drive the relationship. And so I think for everybody out there listening, maybe spend some time with that. How do you want to drive in the relationships in your life? Because those relationships, as studies have shown, will determine your long-term happiness and health. They are the number one indicator of your long-term happiness and health, which is your relationships. And so the more that we can invest time, effort, energy, etc., into those relationships, the better our lives are going to be. Period, full stop. So I think that's the biggest piece. Where you can find me, ManTalks.com. I have a podcast called the ManTalks Podcast, and then my book is just called Men's Work. And I definitely go check it out. A lot of people have loved the book. It's done exceptionally well. And it's meant to be something that you can do the work inside of. So every chapter has questions and exercises that you can do and implement and strategies. And so it's very, there's like concepts and there's tactical, and concepts and tactical. So yeah, check it out and hit me up on Instagram at ManTalks. Would love to hear from you and any questions that you have. But yeah, thanks for having me.
I love it, man. Oh, of course, dude. This was awesome. Guys, we're going to have all the links in the show notes, and Connor, you're going to love the link that we have in the show notes for you. Because it's going to be really, really easy to remember. If you guys head on over to thedadedge.com/456. Again, thedadedge.com/456. We'll have all of Connor's handles on social, as well as his website, as well as his book. You guys will be able to find it all there. Connor, from my heart to yours, thank you so much for coming on today. This was awesome. And I definitely learned a lot, especially about porn. And I'm really kind of freaked out about this whole AI thing coming out, but holy crap, that's going to be a whole new monster. So, but thanks for coming on, brother. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
You bet. Gentlemen, go out, live legendary. Take care.